You really thought I was going to marry you? The words didn't echo. They landed. Heavy. Public. Final. That was the part no one in the room expected. Not the laughter from the woman in the red dress wrapped around Casanova's arm. Not the way his friends leaned back, watching like it was entertainment. Not even the ring, sliding from Jane's fingers and hitting the polished floor with a soft, hollow sound. It was Jane, because she didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't even look embarrassed. She just stood there, still in her simple cream blouse and dark skirt, the same boring outfit he used to joke about, the same quiet presence he had spent months overlooking. One hand rose slowly to her chest, not dramatic, not pleading, just a small, measured touch, like someone confirming something internal, like someone checking a pulse and realizing it had already stopped. Her eyes didn't move to the woman in red. They stayed on him, calm, focused, certain. Not the look of someone being left, the look of someone who had just finished calculating. Casanova smiled, adjusting his cufflinks like he had upgraded his life. What he didn't realize was that this moment was the last moment he would ever feel in control. If you've ever seen someone lose everything because they underestimated the wrong person, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what happens next, no one in that room was ready for it. He didn't follow her when she stepped closer. That should have been the first sign. Casanova stayed exactly where he was, one arm still wrapped around the woman in red, fingers resting casually against her waist like nothing about this moment required adjustment, like Jane's presence was an interruption, not a consequence. "You should have called," he said lightly, glancing at his watch instead of her. "I would have told you not to come." A few of his friends chuckled under their breath. Someone shifted, pretending to sip a drink. No one stepped in. Jane moved one step further into the room. Not rushed, not hesitant, just precise. The city stretched behind them through the glass walls, bright and distant, the kind of view people paid to feel above everything else. It was the kind of place Casanova liked, high enough to forget what things looked like from the ground. She noticed the details the way she always did. The second glass on the table, the jacket draped over the chair that wasn't his, the faint smear of red on his collar that didn't belong to her. Her gaze passed over it all without stopping. "You're not going to say anything?" the woman in red asked, tilting her head slightly, her tone balanced somewhere between curiosity and performance. Jane didn't look at her, not even once. Her attention stayed on Casanova, steady and unbroken, as if he were the only variable in the room that mattered. He continued, exhaling like this conversation was an inconvenience he'd already resolved in his head. This, he gestured vaguely between them, wasn't permanent. The word hung there. Wasn't. Jane's hand lowered slowly from her chest. Her fingers brushed against the ring. For a moment, she held it there, not clinging, not hesitating, just feeling the weight of it, the way one might assess something before deciding where it belonged. Then she slid it off. No flourish, no pause for effect. The ring left her finger as easily as it had been placed there. It hit the floor once. A soft, precise sound that cut through the room sharper than shouting ever could. Casanova's smile faltered, just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough. Jane didn't bend to pick it up. She didn't ask for an explanation, didn't demand dignity from a room that had already decided she wasn't worth defending. She just looked at him, really looked this time. Not at the man he presented, not at the charm, the confidence, the practiced ease. At the pattern, at the assumption, at the quiet, unshakable belief he had carried all this time, that she would stay, that she had nowhere else to go. Her chin lifted a fraction. A decision, not a reaction. She said, "Okay." Just that. No tremble, no break in her voice, no anger to soften it. And somehow, that was worse. Because there was nothing in it for him to argue against, nothing to fix, nothing to win back. She turned. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to make it clear that whatever this was, it was already over. Behind her, the room stayed silent, because somewhere, beneath the surface of laughter and expensive glass and borrowed confidence, something had just shifted, and no one there understood it yet, except her. Casanova told the story later like it had been simple, like she had always been simple. A teacher, he would say, shrugging it off to anyone who asked. Quiet type, routine, nothing complicated. It was easier that way. Easier than explaining why nothing in his life seemed to function the same after she walked out. Easier than admitting he had never actually known the woman he was about to marry. Because Jane had never corrected him. Not when he joked about her predictable schedule. Not when he called her life safe. Not even when he told people she preferred the background. She had let him believe it. What he saw was a classroom. What he didn't see were the hours before sunrise, when she moved through silence like it belonged to her. The kind of discipline that wasn't taught, it was carved in. Precision in small things, awareness of space, of timing, of people. Jane didn't waste motion, didn't waste words, and she never reacted to anything she hadn't already processed. He thought her calmness came from a lack of experience. It didn't. It came from having already seen enough to know what mattered. At his events, she stood beside him without competing for attention. While others talked over each other, trying to be heard, Jane listened. Not passively, never passively, but with intention. The kind of listening that mapped a room without needing to control it. People underestimated that. They always did. Casanova, most of all. He liked being the center of things, the deal maker, the one who spoke loud enough that others adjusted around him. And Jane fit into that image perfectly, quiet, composed, never interrupting. He thought she added balance. What she actually did was hold structure. There were moments, small, forgettable ones, that should have stood out. A contract he was about to sign, casually flipped closed by her with a single question that made him hesitate. A meeting he almost missed, rescheduled without explanation, that later turned out to be the one that mattered most. A name she mentioned once, just once, that he later heard echoed in a room he wasn't supposed to have access to. He never asked how she knew these things, because asking would have required acknowledging that she knew more than she showed, and that didn't fit the version of her he preferred, so he filled in the gaps with assumptions. Teacher, quiet, safe, replaceable. He never noticed how often his worst decisions happened when she wasn't around to say anything. Never connected the pattern, never questioned why things seemed to fall into place when she was near and unravel when she wasn't. Jane never pointed it out. She didn't need to, because she had already made her own calculations, already understood the difference between being valued and being used as something convenient. Already recognized the exact moment someone stops seeing you clearly and starts seeing only what benefits them. By the time Casanova called her boring, she had already stopped trying to be understood. And somewhere beneath all the silence he mistook for simplicity, she had already decided she wouldn't stay where she wasn't seen. She didn't start planning the night he embarrassed her. That was just the moment he finally noticed something had ended. Jane had begun 3 days earlier. 72 hours isn't a long time, unless you already know exactly what needs to be done. The first shift happened quietly. A folder moved from one place to another, a document copied, not deleted, access reviewed, not revoked, just understood. She sat at the small desk in the corner of their apartment late at night, the glow of her screen soft against her face, moving through files Casanova barely remembered existed. He called them boring paperwork. Jane read every line. Ownership structures, silent partners, contingency clauses buried under pages of language designed to discourage attention. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Each detail filed away, each connection mapped, each vulnerability noted with the same calm precision she brought to everything else. She wasn't stealing anything. She was separating what had always been hers from what he only believed he owned. The second shift was positioning. Accounts weren't emptied, they were redirected. Small movements, insignificant on their own, invisible unless you knew where to look. She adjusted timelines, restructured authorizations, moved leverage into places that wouldn't draw suspicion. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would alert someone who didn't think to check. Casanova didn't think to check. He was busy. Meetings, dinners, appearances, the kind of life that filled itself with noise so you never had to listen too closely to anything beneath it. Jane used that, not against him, just around him. By the second day, the framework was already in place. People he relied on had been spoken to, carefully, indirectly, without ever saying too much. A conversation here, a clarification there, enough to shift alignment without creating resistance. She didn't ask anyone to choose sides, she simply made it clear what the sides were, and then she stepped back. The third shift was legal. Clean, quiet, final. Documents drafted with the kind of language that doesn't invite argument. Clauses that activated the moment they were needed, not the moment they were noticed. Signatures placed where they would matter most. By the time anything became visible, it would already be irreversible. She finished everything before the confrontation ever happened, before the red dress, before the laughter, before the ring touched the floor. When she stood in that room, hand pressed lightly against her chest, she wasn't deciding what to do. She had already done it. The plan didn't depend on emotion, didn't require anger, didn't need him to understand. It only required one thing, that she walk away. And when she turned her back on him that night, leaving behind the noise and the certainty and the version of her he had built in his mind, she wasn't leaving empty-handed. She was leaving with everything that mattered already secured. Casanova thought the silence meant she had nothing left to say. He didn't realize it meant she had nothing left to negotiate. She didn't go back upstairs. There was nothing there that belonged to her anymore. The elevator ride down was quiet, uninterrupted. No calls, no messages, no last-minute hesitation. Jane stood with her hands at her sides, posture straight, eyes forward, the same way she stood through everything. Controlled, measured, certain. When the doors opened, the lobby felt smaller than usual. Too bright, too exposed. A few people looked up as she crossed the marble floor, recognition flickering and fading just as quickly. To them, she was still what she had always been, Casanova's quiet fiancée, the one who smiled politely, the one who never caused a scene. They didn't stop her. No one ever does when someone leaves like they've already decided. Outside, the night had settled into that steady, indifferent rhythm of the city. Cars moving, lights shifting, everything continuing exactly as it had before. Jane stepped onto the curb. And then she stopped. Not because she didn't know where to go, but because she heard them. Engines. Low, controlled, synchronized. 4 black vehicles turned the corner in perfect alignment, headlights cutting clean lines across the pavement. They didn't rush, they didn't hesitate. They moved like something that didn't need permission to exist in that space. People noticed this time. Conversations paused. A valet took a step back. Someone near the entrance lowered their voice mid-sentence. The convoy pulled to a stop in front of her. Not blocking her path, waiting. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rear door of the lead car opened. He stepped out without urgency, like time adjusted around him rather than the other way around. Dark suit, no excess, No visible signal of authority except the way the air seemed to shift when he moved through it. His gaze found Jane immediately. Not searching, recognizing. "You're done here?" he said, voice low, even. Not a question. Jane held his gaze for a second. Then she gave the smallest nod. No explanation, no hesitation, just confirmation. Behind him, the others remained exactly where they were. No movement, no unnecessary attention, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from discipline alone, but from certainty. This wasn't security. This was something else. The man stepped aside, opening the car door, not as a gesture of politeness, but as a matter of course, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. Jane picked up the small bag she had brought with her. That was all. No luggage, no second trip, no looking back toward the building behind her. She crossed the distance between them without pause. When she reached the car, she didn't thank him, didn't ask where they were going. She got in, the door closed, and just like that, she was gone. The convoy moved as one, pulling away from the curb with the same quiet precision it had arrived with. Within seconds, the street returned to normal. Conversations resumed, the valet exhaled, someone laughed too loudly, trying to fill the space left behind. Upstairs, Casanova was still talking, still explaining, still certain he had control over how this story would end. He didn't know that the most important part of it had already left the building, and he definitely didn't know she hadn't left alone. The first problem was small enough to ignore. It appeared on a screen no one important was looking at. A minor delay, a system timeout, the kind of thing that happens when networks get overloaded or someone forgets to update a certificate on time. One of the junior developers flagged it, ran a quick fix, and expected it to clear. It didn't. He tried again. Still nothing. By the time it reached the senior team, it had already been labeled what it wasn't: routine, temporary, not worth escalating. "Give it an hour," someone said. "It'll reset." It didn't reset. By mid-morning, a second system lagged, then a third. Nothing dramatic, no alarms, no flashing warnings, just friction. Processes that used to take seconds stretching into minutes. Authorizations that required a second attempt, then a third. The kind of inefficiency that doesn't break anything outright, but starts to make people uneasy. Casanova wasn't there when it started. He was at brunch, laughing too loudly, recounting a version of the previous night that made him look decisive, in control, unbothered. "She took it better than I expected," he said, adjusting his sunglasses like the conversation was already behind him. Honestly, it was overdue. Across the table, someone nodded. Another checked their phone. None of them mentioned the way his assistant had called twice already. By the time he arrived at the office, the tone had shifted. Not panic, not yet, but the kind of quiet tension that settles into a room when people stop assuming things will fix themselves. "What's going on?" he asked, stepping into the main workspace. His lead developer turned toward him, expression tight, not alarmed, but no longer relaxed. "We're seeing some irregularities in the system. Access delays, a few authorization loops we can't override." Casanova waved it off before he finished. "Then override them," he said, already moving past him. "We tried." That made him pause. Only for a second. "Tried how?" he asked, glancing back. "Primary and secondary protocols. They're not responding." Casanova exhaled, slow and controlled, the way someone does when they're about to explain something obvious. "Then escalate it," he said. "Call whoever you need to call. It's a system. Systems don't just stop." The room went quiet, because they all knew systems didn't just stop. Not like this, not without a reason. By early afternoon, the first external complaint came in, a partner firm reporting delays, minor but noticeable, then another, then a third. Casanova stayed in his office, door half closed, phone in hand, irritation building, not from concern, but from inconvenience. His schedule was tightening, meetings pushing, people asking questions he didn't have time for. "Fix it," he said into the phone. "I don't care what it takes." On the other end, someone hesitated. "There's something else," they said carefully. "We're seeing restricted flags on certain access points, higher clearance than usual." Casanova frowned. "From who?" "That's the problem," the voice replied. "We can't see that yet." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline beyond the glass. For a moment, just a moment, something shifted behind his expression. Then it was gone. "Then figure it out," he said, ending the call. Outside his office, the team kept working, refreshing, retrying, rechecking, watching as small things stopped behaving the way they were supposed to, one by one, quietly, systematically, like something had reached into the foundation and started pulling, thread by thread. Casanova adjusted his cufflinks, glancing at his reflection in the glass, irritated, unimpressed, still certain this was temporary. He didn't connect it, didn't think back to the moment the ring hit the floor, didn't consider the possibility that the timing wasn't coincidence, because in his mind, Jane had left with nothing, and people who leave with nothing don't take anything with them. He would realize later that wasn't true. By the next morning, the problems had names. Not errors, not delays, denials. The first contract didn't fail, it returned a message no one in the room had seen before. Clean, formal, final. Access revoked pending federal review. No explanation, no contact point, no timeline. Just gone. "Try again," Casanova said, standing behind the team, voice steady in a way that suggested repetition would solve it. They tried again. Same result. A second contract followed before noon, then a third. Each one disappearing not with noise, but with the quiet efficiency of something being removed from a system that no longer recognized it. "This doesn't make sense," someone muttered, fingers moving faster now, less controlled. "These are secured channels. They don't just what?" Casanova cut in, sharper this time. "Glitch? Then fix the glitch." His lead developer turned, hesitation replaced with something closer to concern. "This isn't a glitch," he said. "These are clearance issues. Something above our level is—" "Above your level doesn't mean above mine," Casanova snapped, already pulling out his phone. "Get me someone who can actually do something about it." Calls were made. Then more calls, each one ending the same way. Transfers, holds, polite voices repeating variations of the same sentence, carefully worded, deliberately vague. "This system is currently under review. Authorization must come from the primary clearance holder. We are unable to provide further details at this time." By early afternoon, the tone of the office had shifted completely. No one was pretending anymore. The quiet tension had cracked open into something sharper, conversations lowered but faster, screens refreshed obsessively, eyes flicked toward Casanova more often now, not for direction, but for answers. He didn't have any. "Who's the clearance holder?" he demanded finally, turning to his operations director. The man hesitated, not because he didn't know, because he understood what saying it would mean. "You need to tell me now," Casanova pressed, voice dropping. A beat, then, "It's Jane." The room stilled. Not dramatically, just enough. Casanova didn't react right away. The name hung there, suspended between disbelief and something he hadn't allowed himself to consider. "That's not possible," he said, almost automatically. "She's a teacher." No one responded, because they had all seen the access logs, seen the authorization hierarchy, seen the way every locked door traced back to the same origin point. Casanova turned away, jaw tightening, mind moving faster now, reworking assumptions, rejecting them, rebuilding them into something that still left him in control. "She wouldn't do this," he said, more to himself than anyone else. But even as he said it, another system went dark, then another. Phones started ringing again, but this time they weren't internal, partners, investors, people who didn't wait for explanations. What's happening? Why are we locked out? Is this a breach? The questions overlapped, urgency replacing patience. Across the office, someone swore under their breath. Another slammed a hand at the desk. Panic didn't arrive all at once. It spread, slow, controlled, inevitable, like something tightening around the entire structure. Casanova stood in the center of it all, phone still in his hand, staring at a screen that no longer responded the way it always had. For the first time, the reflection in the glass behind it didn't look as steady. Not broken, not yet, but no longer certain. From somewhere between the contracts disappearing and the systems locking him out, the possibility had started to form. Small, unwelcome. That this wasn't random. That this wasn't temporary. That this had been done. And if it had been done, then someone had planned it. He thought about the silence she left behind, about the way she had looked at him, calm, focused, certain. And for the first time, Casanova stopped asking how to fix it and started wondering what exactly she had taken with her when she walked away. He didn't call her. Not at first. Casanova told himself there was a reason for that. Strategy, timing, control. You don't tase someone who just walked out. You let them come back. Except nothing else was coming back. By the second day, 5 contracts were gone. By the third, every system that mattered required authorization he no longer had. Not delayed, not pending, denied. The word showed up everywhere now, clean and consistent, like a signature he couldn't erase. His team stopped trying to fix it and started trying to understand it. That was worse, because understanding meant asking questions no one had needed to ask before. Who actually held the keys? Who had the authority behind the authority? And why had no one noticed? They pulled the access logs again, cross-referenced them, checked the hierarchy, the certifications, the override chains. Every path led back to the same place. Jane. Not as a secondary user, not as an assistant. Primary. Root level. The origin point every system deferred to. Casanova stared at the screen longer this time, as if looking hard enough would rearrange what it said. She never touched any of this, he said. No one answered, because the record said she touched all of it, quietly, consistently, for longer than any of them had been paying attention. The realization didn't arrive like a shock. It settled, slow and heavy, like something that had always been true, finally being seen. He hired investigators that afternoon, not amateurs, not the kind that ran background checks and called it due diligence. People who knew how to move through edges, who understood how to ask questions without triggering alarms, who could find things others preferred to keep buried. He gave them everything he had: her name, her routine, her last known location. Find her, he said, and find out who she's connected to. They didn't ask why. They didn't need to. 3 days later, they came back with less than they started with. She's off-grid, the lead investigator said, placing a thin folder on the table. No digital footprint since the night she left. No financial activity we can trace. No confirmed location. That's not possible, Casanova replied immediately. Everyone leaves something. Not everyone, the man said carefully. Casanova's gaze hardened. Then you're not looking hard enough. A pause. Then the investigator slid a single photograph across the table. Grainy, distant, taken from far enough away that details blurred at the edges, but not enough to miss what mattered. Jane, stepping out of a black vehicle. Not alone. The man beside her stood just half a step back, not leading, not following, matching her pace. His posture relaxed but not careless, the kind of stillness that suggested awareness in every direction at once. Behind them, more vehicles, positioned, deliberate. Who was that? Casanova asked. The investigator didn't answer right away, because this part required precision. he said finally. We ran him through every channel available to us: corporate records, private networks, international databases. And nothing came back clean. Casanova's jaw tightened. Meaning? Meaning, the investigator said, voice lower now, every path we followed either stopped or redirected. He let that sit for a second before continuing. That doesn't happen by accident. Casanova looked back at the photograph, at the way the man's attention wasn't on the surroundings, wasn't on the security. It was on Jane. Not protective, not possessive, acknowledging. Like she wasn't being escorted, she was being received. Who is that? Casanova asked again, quieter this time. The investigator exhaled slowly. We don't have a name we can confirm, he said, but the pattern suggests organized power, not corporate, not government. A beat. Something older. The room went still. Casanova's eyes stayed on the image, on the distance between what he thought he knew and what was starting to take shape. Jane hadn't just walked away from him. She had walked into something else, something that didn't leave records, didn't answer questions, didn't need permission. And for the first time since this began, the problem in front of him no longer looked like something he could fix. It looked like something he never understood and might never reach. He shouldn't have gone. That thought crossed Casanova's mind exactly once, right before he stepped out of the car and handed his name to the attendant like nothing had changed. The invitation still worked. That was enough for him. Inside, the gala moved with the same polished rhythm it always had. Low conversations, measured laughter, deals being shaped in the spaces between handshakes. Glass walls stretched high above the city, reflecting power in every direction. 3 weeks ago, this room would have turned when he entered. Tonight, it didn't. Not immediately. A few people glanced over, recognized him, looked away. The shift was subtle, but it was there. Casanova adjusted his jacket, stepping further inside, forcing familiarity into his movements. Control wasn't something you lost all at once. It slipped, piece by piece, until you either noticed or pretended you didn't. He chose the second. Then he saw her. Jane stood near the center of the room, and the difference wasn't what she wore, though the dress was different, structured, precise. Nothing about it asked for attention, and yet the room had already given it to her. No, the difference was the way everything around her behaved. People didn't approach her casually. They approached with intention. Conversations paused when she spoke. Space adjusted without being asked. Not for show, for recognition. Casanova moved toward her before he could think better of it. He didn't notice the way his own path didn't clear the way it used to. Didn't notice how the room continued around him instead of parting. He stopped 6 feet away. Jane. She turned like she had been expecting him. No surprise, no tension, just acknowledgement. You need to stop this, he said, keeping his voice low, controlled. Whatever you've done, the contracts, the accounts, you need to reverse it. For a moment, she just looked at him. Not cold, not emotional, measured. You're assuming I started something, she said. Before he could respond, a voice entered the space. Not loud, but precise enough that it didn't need volume. He's also assuming he still has time. Casanova turned. The man from the photograph stood beside her now. Same posture, same stillness, same quiet presence that didn't compete for attention, but somehow held it anyway. You, Casanova said, recognition's heightening his voice. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, the man replied calmly. He reached into his jacket and removed a document. Not rushed, not performed, presented. 18 months ago, he said, his tone carrying just enough to draw the attention of those closest, your primary line of credit was acquired through a private holding structure. Casanova's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. That structure, he continued, has been waiting for a condition, a pause, not for effect, for certainty. That condition has been met. He extended the document, not directly to Casanova, but into the space between them where others could see it. The debt is being called in full, effective tonight. The number wasn't spoken loudly. It didn't need to be. It moved through the room anyway, carried in the silence that followed. Casanova didn't take the paper, didn't need to. He already knew. Somewhere, buried in signatures he hadn't bothered to read closely enough, this had been written. "This is illegal," he said, but the words lacked weight. "No," he replied simply. "It isn't." Around them, the room had shifted completely now. Not chaotic, not loud, just attentive, watching, understanding something irreversible was happening in real time. Casanova looked back at Jane. "This is your doing," he said. She didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. "I didn't take anything from you," she said quietly. Another pause. Then, "I just stopped holding it together." The words landed heavier than the debt. Because in that moment, everything connected. The systems, the contracts, the silence. Her. Casanova felt it then. Not the loss, not fully, but the absence of control. The realization that whatever power he thought he had never actually been his. And standing there, in a room that no longer recognized him the same way, he understood something too late to change it. The shift hadn't started tonight. It hadn't started when the systems failed. It hadn't even started when she walked away. It started the moment he decided she didn't matter. And now, everyone else was seeing what he hadn't. No one raised their voice. That was the part that made it final. There was no chaos, no shouting, no dramatic collapse. Just a quiet shift in position. Casanova felt it before he saw it. The subtle movement at the edges of the room. Men he hadn't noticed before, stepping forward with a kind of precision that didn't belong to private security. No hesitation, no need to announce themselves. One of them stopped just behind his shoulder. "Sir," he said, voice even, controlled. "We need you to come with us." Casanova didn't turn immediately, because turning would make it real. "This isn't the time," he replied, keeping his eyes on Jane, as if the rest of the room could still be dismissed. "Handle whatever this is later." "It's already been handled," the man said. That made him turn. Credentials were shown, not flashed, not forced into attention, just presented with the quiet confidence of something that didn't require approval. Casanova looked at them, read enough to understand. Not everything, but enough. "This is a mistake," he said, the words coming faster now, less controlled. "You don't have the authority." "We do." No edge, no escalation, just fact. Around them, the room had gone still. Not frozen, observing. No one stepped in, no one objected. Conversations had dissolved into silence, attention narrowing to a single point. Casanova glanced around, searching for something familiar, an ally, a voice, someone who would interrupt this and reset the balance. There was no one. The people who used to move toward him now held their distance. The ones who used to wait for his attention were suddenly occupied elsewhere. Even the woman in red, somewhere near the back, had already begun to disappear into the crowd. He looks back at Jane. "This is what you wanted?" he asked, quieter now. Not anger, not quite. Something closer to disbelief. Jane held his gaze, and for the first time, there was no distance in it. No quiet patience, no restraint. Just clarity. "This is what happens," she said, "when you mistake someone holding your world together for someone who needs it." The words didn't linger. They settled. The man beside him gestured, not forcefully, not urgently, just enough. Casanova didn't resist. Not because he accepted it, because he hadn't figured out how to stop it. As they began to move, the room adjusted again. Space opening not for him, but for the process, for the inevitability of it. He caught fragments as he passed. Low voices, careful phrasing. Classified breach, unauthorized exposure, internal misuse. Words that carried weight far beyond the room. Words that didn't fade once spoken. At the exit, he paused, just for a second, long enough to look back. Jane hadn't moved. Still at the center, still composed, but no longer overlooked. The man beside her remained exactly where he had been, unchanged, unaffected, as if this outcome had always made the most sense. Casanova felt it then. Not the panic, that would come later. Not the loss, that would take time to understand. This was something else. The precise moment a person realizes everything they built was never secured the way they believed, that the foundation had never belonged to them, that the power they relied on was borrowed. And now, it was gone. The doors closed behind him without sound. Inside, the room didn't erupt, didn't react. It simply continued, because power had already shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. By morning, his accounts would be frozen. By afternoon, his name would start disappearing. By the end of the week, there would be nothing left to return to. No position, no influence, no version of himself that still worked in the world he used to control. Casanova had spent years building something he believed couldn't be taken from him. He was wrong, because he never realized the most important part of it was never his to lose. The room didn't celebrate. It settled, like something long out of alignment had finally corrected itself. Conversations resumed, but softer now, more deliberate. Names were spoken with care, positions recalculated in real time. The absence Casanova left behind didn't create a vacuum. It revealed one that had always been there. Jane hadn't moved, not because she needed to stay, because nothing in the room required her to. The man beside her glanced once toward the exit, then back to her, as if confirming what they both already knew. This part was finished. Timing was precise, he said quietly. It had to be, Jane replied. No satisfaction in her voice, no victory, just completion. Across the room, a familiar figure approached, slower than usual, posture adjusted, not weakened, but aware. One of the board members Casanova used to speak over without consequence. "Miss Jane," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. "We weren't aware." Jane looked at him, not dismissive, not forgiving, just clear. "You didn't need to be," she said. He nodded, accepting it for what it was, not an explanation, but a boundary. Because the truth wasn't something she had hidden, it was something no one had thought to look for. Meridian had never been Casanova's, not in the way that mattered. His name was on the front, his voice carried the meetings, his presence filled the rooms. But the architecture, the systems that made it function, the structure that held under pressure, the decisions that avoided collapse before it ever became visible, those had always come from somewhere quieter. Jane didn't build Meridian for recognition. She built it to work, to endure, to function even when the people inside it didn't fully understand how. And when she left, it didn't break, it realigned. The man beside her shifted slightly, just enough to signal a transition. "Some of them will ask questions," he said. "They already are," Jane replied. "And your answer?" She glanced across the room, not at the people, but at the patterns, the movement, the recalibration happening without instruction. "They'll get what they need, not what they expect." He studied her for a moment, then inclined his head, a gesture that wasn't deference, but recognition, because whatever authority he carried, he understood exactly where it stood in relation to hers. "Your father will want confirmation," he added. Jane's expression didn't change. "He already has it." A brief pause, then, almost as an afterthought, nothing here moved without his awareness. The statement wasn't heavy. It didn't need to be. Power like that didn't announce itself. It existed. Around them, the final pieces continued to settle, calls being made, alignments shifting, the quiet reordering of a structure that no longer needed to pretend. Jane reached for a glass of water, fingers steady, movement unhurried. No one interrupted her. No one questioned her place. Not anymore. Because the room understood something now it hadn't before, not through declaration, through consequence.
She hadn't stepped into power tonight. She hadn't taken it. She'd simply stopped withholding it. And once that happened, everything else followed. The noise, the status, the illusion of control, it had all belonged to someone who thought presence meant ownership. But real power didn't need to be loud, didn't need to be seen. It just needed to be undeniable. Jane set the glass down and turned slightly, the city stretching beyond the glass behind her, vast, lit, indifferent. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "To anyone still unsure," she said, not raising her voice, yet heard anyway, "nothing here changed tonight." A pause. Just long enough for the truth to settle. It was always this way. And now, everyone could see it. The city kept moving. Lights flickered across glass towers. Traffic flowed like nothing had shifted, but inside that room, everything had already changed. Not because someone powerful walked in, but because the person they overlooked stopped staying small. Jane didn't win by being louder. She didn't fight harder. She didn't even try to prove anything. She simply stepped back and let the truth reveal itself. And that's what makes this story different. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't retaliation, it's removal. It's knowing your value so clearly that when someone disrespects it, you don't argue, you reposition. So here's the real question. If you were in that room, would you have seen her for who she really was? Or would you have made the same mistake Casanova did? If this story kept you hooked, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And tell me this, do you think Jane planned everything from the beginning, or did he force her hand? I'll see you in the next story.